This episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a part of your workday. And of course, big shout out as well to everybody listening out there on that RealAg Radio podcast, Canada, the U.S., or beyond. It is great to have you all in the RealAg community. We're going to talk today about an issue that, well, not necessarily an issue, but a report that Farm Credit Canada has put out talking about land rental rates in the country and looking at it from 2 points of view. Land rent as a ratio of land value, land rent as a ratio to revenue. And of course, it produces a little bit of a different ranking when you look at all the different provinces. So we're going to talk about that with JP Gervais. He's chief economist with Farm Credit Canada, and looking forward to that discussion. I got a lot of questions. Did you know that 40% of the farmland in Canada is rented? I'm going to ask JP if that's number's always been that way, or I kind of was surprised it was that high, to be honest with you. Maybe you're not surprised, but I definitely was. We're also going to hear today from Greg Northey. He's with Pulse Canada. They've got a campaign that is running right now, along with a number of other farm organizations, looking at some of the changes they believe need to happen with extended interswitching in order to really boost and improve railway productivity. So we'll get the farm group's reaction and push for that and the why of it and how it would make a difference. We'll also have time today for the top ag news stories of the day. If you have any feedback on today's show, hey, we'd love to hear from you. It's easy. There's multiple ways to provide feedback. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms as Real Agriculture, or you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Got some feedback here on a column that was recently posted at RealAgriculture.com, written by Justin Funk of AgriStudies. It has to do with a study that Real Agri-Studies did back in December, supplier interaction review, looking at how salespeople across all the different verticals, how they deal with farmers in 2022 and how farmers want to be sold to in 2023. One of the findings was that really the amount of sales calls or the amount of salespeople that are calling on farmers, it has gone down, and the number of times they're reaching out has gone down. And here's the other piece. The other piece is that there's lots of farmers who aren't being contacted by any salespeople. And farm size definitely is a bit of a factor in that. And so Justin wrote about, hey, where have all the salespeople gone? Got some pieces of feedback from a couple people that read that post. First up, Paul. He says, the only interaction I have with salespeople is I phone them first. None ever contact me, let alone come out to the farm. Never. I am curious as to what alternate universe you made your study in. Well, thanks for the email, Paul. I do know you are a frequent listener here to this show and a visitor to realagriculture.com. No alternate universe. No. I think there was like 650, 700 farmers across the country that were surveyed. Now, Paul, you may be in that category of farmers that are not being contacted. And there is a subset of farmers that really receive no calls. And so your experience is not necessarily unique. I actually think in some ways it's growing. So appreciate the feedback, Paul. Also, we got Craig, who sends a note and says, there is a younger generation of salespeople that are very disconnected with how to visit with people face to face. Their confidence is extremely low unless they can text and not see someone in person. The universities need to address this. Plus, online shopping is killing the role of ag salespeople, and the younger farmers are more savvy in electronic communications and prefer communication by text alerts. Appreciate the comment, Craig. So a couple things. Here's what we found is that, and we surveyed farmers. We didn't survey the salespeople themselves, which would be an interesting dynamic to contrast and compare here. But what farmers said is they want face-to-face. That in 2022, there was a lot of via text and phone, and farmers across the country said, I want more face-to-face sales calls from the people that are calling on me. That was very, very clear across Canada. Now, I agree that a lot of my observation and perception is that, yes, there is a lot of salespeople that feel they can be more efficient, right? Instead of, like, if you're a salesperson in Saskatchewan, you may have to visit your territory, you could be driving a lot of miles, right? And so it may be much more efficient to get more sales calls in, right, in a day by sitting in your office and making those calls and sending those texts and those kinds of things. But is that what your customer wants? Our study said no, they don't want that. The other piece about online sales is that what we found is that there's a very small amount of farmers that are buying online currently for something like crop supplies, as an example. And there's very little desire to do so in 2023. So I think that's one of the things that is overblown a lot is the potential for online sales, at least to this point. That may change, but at least to this point. So Paul, Craig, thanks so much for your feedback. If you have a thought on all this, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk to JP Gervais of Farm Credit Canada right after this. We're talking to Murray Purvis. He is the owner of ABJ Agri Products. Hey, Murray, let's talk about this Easy Jet nozzle. People are talking about it. It's getting a lot of attention. What are some of the features and benefits?
Well, since the case aim system came out, what we found was you're using a state-of-the-art spraying system, but you're using an old technology nozzle. In other words, at higher pressure, 40 to 60, you've got a lot of drift. Those nozzles, about 25% of the droplets are driftable. Whereas with EasyJet, it's more like 2%. Then there's the other side. You end up with larger droplets when you drop the pressure to reduce your drift. So with EasyJets, you have minimal drift. You spray at 40 to 60 PSI, and you have optimal droplets.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, I encourage everybody to check out the website. That again is abjagra.com. Hey, Murray, really appreciate you joining us here today. Good luck with the upcoming season.
Great. Thanks, Shaun.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com. And what an opportunity. Oh my gosh. You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. We're going to talk about land rents. Now, there's land values, and many of you are land owners, but a considerable amount of you are also maybe fully or at least a portion of your acres are rented. Now, those rental agreements and the rates that are set can really have an impact on your profitability. And of course, there's a lot, hey, who's pushing these rents higher? Or, are rents going to come down? All these kind of questions are really, really important. We're going to get into that in a second with our next guest. But first, I want to tell you about Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. Go to borax.com. We're joined right now by the chief economist with Farm Credit Canada is JP Gervais. JP, welcome to the show.
It's always a pleasure, Shaun. Thanks so much for the invite.
Okay, we're going to talk land values today. Now, I shouldn't say land values. We're going to talk about land rents and partly relative to the land value, which is an important ratio. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Now, the report says that 40% of the land in Canada is rented. I was actually surprised by that number. I thought it was high. Is that number relatively stable?
It's been stable for a couple of census years, basically. It's been trending up. I would say if you go back a little bit more in time, if you take a more of a long-term perspective, it's been upward, and 40% is an average. So if you're looking at some of the provinces in central Canada, you would probably find a little bit of a lower percentage of land that is being rented. So it's a bit more of a prairie phenomena. And yeah, it's been trending up slightly, but there's a little bit of stability now, I'd say, in the data, which is not surprising given that we've been reporting that land sales are, land transactions, or the available supply of land available in the market is very thin. So that makes sense that, this number is actually quite stable now.
What's the key driver of rental rates? Supply would be one. The land value would be one. Those two obviously a little bit related. Farm profitability. What am I missing?
Well, I think you're not missing too much. I mean, one of the things that we thought of that was going to be interesting this year is that we've been doing the farmland value report for a number of years now. This is the third year that we're doing an investigation of land rental rates. Obviously, not a whole lot of data on this issue. So we go about doing this a little bit different than the farmland value report. We leverage part of our methodology for the farmland value report. We have those benchmark properties across the country. So what we are doing is to assess what would be the land rental rate if this benchmark property that we have in our data set would be available to be rented. So a little bit of a different approach to it. We don't have the large data sets of the transactions and the land values and so forth. And then interestingly, what we wanted to know is just to say, well, we know land values have been going up in 2022. So if you look at land rental rates going into this next season, they've been going up or down, or been trending up at the same kind of speed and pace as land values, those type of things, right? So going back to your question, I think you hit it on the nail. I mean, in terms of what would impact land rental rates, you look at it from the perspective of the landowner. Interest rates would matter too, because at the end of the day, landowners are own capital, and they need a return on that capital. And so, if interest rates are going up, that perhaps is one of the factors that would push land values up. Is the idea that I need to get a little bit of a bigger return in this environment of higher interest rates. So that's one thing. But obviously farm profitability, the ability of tenant to farm for profit, is absolutely critical. And, the relationship as well between the tenant and the landlord is absolutely critical, right? The landlord presumably care about the quality of the land and who's going to take care of their land. And so that relationship matters also as well. So there are just a number of different factors, but profitability, land values, interest rates, I mean, those are the things that I think would matter most.
We're going to talk about the provincial distribution and how there is differences across the country. But do you have any idea on the typical length of some of these land rental agreements, or are we just talking values in the report?
So we're only talking in values about the report. I'm aware of some of the studies that have been done at the University of Guelph, for example, in the past, which actually, if I'm not mistaken, have been reporting that the length of those contracts has been going up. Whereas in the past, and I don't know how far back you need to go, but in the past, it would be the year-to-year type of handshake. I think now we have more structured agreements between tenant and landlords, which I think is a good thing, frankly. Yeah. And then there's a number of different resources for farm operators to consult when it comes to renting land, and it's available on our website. But I've been seeing that, based on some surveys that have been reported on, done by the University of Guelph, we've seen the length of those contracts actually go up a little bit, which makes sense as well, right? From a stability, predictability, ability to operate, ability to strategize as well for my farm operations. I mean, to have contracts that are a little bit longer in nature would help a little bit as well in that nature. Yeah,
big dollars involved. A handshake is great, and trust is a big thing in the industry. But when we're talking about scaling up equipment and infrastructure and things like that, having something on a piece of paper looked at by a lawyer, not a bad thing in my mind. Okay, let's talk about the values. The Canadian average. Now, this is the average land rental price relative to the value of the land. And FCC, of course, puts out that land value report, does a great job. I love chatting with you about that. So the Canadian average is 2.55%. As you know, there is a wide range, of course, across the country, but also even within the provinces. Irrigation versus dry land is going to be a big factor. At least it should be, and we know it is. So how do the provinces stack up here?
Well, as you said, the average, national average, and I'm just keeping an eye on the corner of my screen here on some of the numbers because I don't have them memorized. But yeah, the national average, as you said, 2.55. And you have prairie provinces that are right in that average. You got Manitoba at 2.4, Saskatchewan a little bit more elevated at 2.1%, and then Alberta at 2.6. So you're right in the average in terms of, what has been the trend that we've reported in the prairies. Now, to your point, absolutely, you got large differences as well. When it comes to rental rates themselves, even relative to land values, within a province. So the ability to farm for a profit, the ability to extract yields out of that land, all those things will matter a great deal when it comes to setting land rental rates. The one thing that I think is interesting in the report, as I said, is to say, all right, we know that land rental rates have been trending up. Now, have been they trending up roughly at the same pace as land values, or are they a little bit lagging, or are they actually accelerating in terms of the increase in land rental rates compared to land values? And for Saskatchewan and Alberta, we are reporting a little bit of an acceleration in land rental rates. For the other provinces, we would have land rental rates that did go up, but not as much as the average land price increase that we reported in 2022, whereas in Alberta and Saskatchewan, we've seen those land rental rates, gain a little bit of speed when it comes to increasing relative to the land values. So I think that's one of the things to consider. I think there are a number of different things, behind this. I think a rebound in yields in 2022. I think tenant and landlords also need to have a really good discussion about farm inputs, because that's, the headline is commodity prices. Well, not necessarily the case now, but certainly in 2022 and part of the early part of the year has been the commodity prices are really strong. But yeah, so are farm inputs as well. And so again, farming for profitability has to be a major driver of the land rental rates. And so I think, the fact that tenant can bring up some of those numbers to their landlords and make them understand that, this is the reality that we're under in terms of, input costs and production costs overall.
Yeah, no, what sticks out to me a little bit here is, as I look at these numbers, is like Saskatchewan, 3.1% of the land value. Ontario, 1.4%. Okay. Now, we also know in 2022, that's the two, I believe, if I remember right, that those are the two provinces that had the sharpest increase in land values. 2021 was a really good year for Ontario farmers. Not so great for Saskatchewan farmers. And I know the 1 year is, it can be a blip here. But I would have thought like Ontario and even Quebec at 1.5, those numbers seem low to me relative to the potential for that land to produce. Like Saskatchewan 3.1, there's not exactly, we found out this in 2021 with the drought, there's not like a surety that you're going to get the production that you're aspiring to because of Mother Nature not cooperating. Is there a reason why we're seeing lower land rents relative to land value in Ontario and Quebec?
I think the explanation, Shaun, good points. And the explanation resides in the average land value that we have in Ontario, for example, right? Some of the large land prices or elevated land prices that we have in Ontario explains the fact that this ratio, when you look at rental rate relative to the actual price of land measured in dollars, and not just in terms of increases, and even if you think of the annual increases that we reported in Ontario for 2022, we've had a very largest in the country, large increase overall in Ontario that applied across all different regions in Ontario. And so that to me suggests that land values in and out of themselves are really elevated, right? So when you look at setting a rental rate based off land value, that rental rate, when you measure it relative to that land value, has to be lower than it is in Saskatchewan. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to make a profit on Ontario with those rental rates, being 3% of land values. And so I think that is where the explanation is. I think it's when you account for the large prices that we have in Ontario, where land is subject to many multiple influences that, the makeup of the industry in Ontario is different than Saskatchewan, urban pressures, and the list goes on. I think that explains a little bit of why we have a lower ratio overall in Ontario than relative to Saskatchewan, for example.
Yeah, because you know what? If you look deeper into the report and you look at land rents relative to production capability, so revenue, the numbers definitely show up differently. And so if we look at a wheat canola rotation, how you've divided it here, in 2022, we're looking at Alberta 18.7%, Saskatchewan 14%, Manitoba 14.7%. And then Ontario is at 22.6% and Quebec's at 15.9%. So, if you look at it on a revenue basis, we're those I guess it kind of flips as you've just explained.
Yeah, that rental rate in Ontario captures a greater share of farm revenues when you look at a typical corn soybean rotation compared to what it would look like, for example, in Saskatchewan with a typical wheat canola rotation evaluated at average yields, average prices, and so forth. Obviously, tons of differences, when you move across a province, because of yields, because of different things. But yeah, absolutely, right? So that rental rate, even though it's a lower percentage of land values in Ontario, it captures a greater share of farm revenues, gross revenues in Ontario compared to Saskatchewan. So again, I think that farming for profitability, I think matters a great deal. And I think that explains some of the differences that we have, in terms of land rental rates across the country.
We're going to have more with JP Gervais of Farm Credit Canada talking about land rents across the country. But first, we got to take a quick break. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
So fascinating to see some of the differences in how, like, when we look at, there's differences in land values, of course, across the country, even amongst the provinces. And then you look at some of the attached land rental rates to that based on value of the land or versus revenue. It's very, very fascinating on some of the differences and how these numbers come to be. It's been fun discussing this with our guest today, JP Gervais, Chief Economist with Farm Credit Canada. Before we continue the discussion with JP, I want to tell you about the 2023 Beef Improvement Federation Research Symposium and Convention. It's happening in Calgary, Alberta. Who wants to go to Cowtown? And the best part is, in July, right next to the Stampede. Yeehaw, let's go. Find out more information at beefimprovement.org/symposium. That's beefimprovement.org/symposium. Okay, so let's go Moneyball here a little bit. If you were buying land, JP, where's the value? Where is there I shouldn't say buying. If I was going to rent land in Canada, where's the value here right now?
Well, again, it's really, we're just, what we think we're bringing to the table here are some numbers to further the discussion, right? Because even if you start answering the question by looking at, okay, where am I now spending less in rental costs relative to what I can gross, I also need to account for the inputs that I need to purchase to make that work and pencil a profit, right? So the inputs, for a wheat canola rotation would be a little different than in terms of corn, soybeans, and so forth. So I think, what we're doing here is bringing some information to get the discussion started for you as an operator to evaluate, well, what are the options between buying and selling? Because you can just as well take that analysis to say, all right, now is this a good time for me to buy? And I know where land values stand. I know where interest rates are. I know my debt repayment capacity because of the balance sheet that I have. And those are my options in the land rental market. Now, am I better off just waiting another year or two and just to consolidate a few things on my balance sheet? So I think, it's really hard or difficult to answer this question, but I do think that it provides a basis for discussion in terms of yourself as an operator, going through the motion of calculating where do I stand when it comes to land rental rates, the possibilities that I have in front of me in terms of what is available in the marketplace, and understand what's the most profitable option, and hopefully not just have that short-term perspective, that next crop year, but have more of a 5-year plan, right? So is that something that I can drive for 5 years, or am I looking to actually make changes within the next 5 years to my plan and actually maybe just try to look to purchase land as opposed to renting it? So I think that's a basis for discussion, really, what we have here.
Okay, let's have that discussion then. So what is there like a threshold, equilibrium point that we watch out for that triggers where it's like, well, if I'm going to pay that much in land rent, I might as well think, I need to, we do this with equipment all the time, right? Lease versus buy. The same thing happens from a land perspective. So what's that threshold that we need to be paying attention to?
Well, I wish I would have that magic number that says, hey, if
you don't have a magic number, JP,
I just don't have it, but as I said, I mean, I think we have the information in front of us. You just need to be able to surround yourself. And if it's okay to seek, you were talking about, getting some legal advice when it comes to land rental rates. Absolutely, right? And it's something that you and I have been discussing, some time now, or some years, I would say, is just to have that CEO mindset. Surround yourself with people that can bring value to you. So if your expertise is more out in the field, that's fine, absolutely great. And you can spend more time there because you're the expert, and then have to just plan for taking the time to sit down with somebody to just crunch up the numbers and say, this is my number, right? As soon as land values in my area flip over this much, given what we are in terms of interest rates, given where we are in terms of, profitability, expected profitability going forward with commodity prices and input costs, like that's my number. And as soon as the number flips, over under this, that's where perhaps I can look to pull the trigger and say, yeah, you know what, maybe the best decision for me going forward is to buy land. Again, it just needs as well to fit your strategic plan. If you have a horizon of time that is quite long in front of you, then that's a quite different discussion than perhaps if you only have 5 years ahead of you. So it's just those numbers that you just need to surround yourself with somebody that can help and bring value to your operation in that way.
Yeah. So from a financial standpoint, we talked earlier about the differences between the prairies on the land rent relative to land value versus the east. So does this mean that we're likely to see more, like if I'm a retiring farmer, sell the operation or get out of farming but hold on to the land, it's a little bit economically viable to do that because I'm getting, say in Saskatchewan, a 3.1% yield versus, say, in Ontario where I'm getting 1.4. Is that true?
Well, that could definitely be a factor. Absolutely. We've been saying now for a number of years that the supply of land, and actually more so this year than ever before, I'm convinced that some of the really large land value numbers that we reported for 2022 are a result of a very, very tight supply of land. And one of the drivers behind that supply of land is exactly what you were pointing out. The idea that if I can get a good yield, if I own the land and I'm just actually transitioning out now of the industry because of my age, because of whatever reason, I can still hold on to the land, get a decent yield, 3.1% in this case. And let's face the reality that we've had the land values increase for, as far as we can remember, right? So I think last time we actually reported a national average decline was 1995. So does that mean that the future is going to repeat itself, infinitely? Absolutely not. I think at some point we might have, a little bit of a few bumps in the road when it comes to the land market, but it's been a really good investment so far. So that I think explains why we have very, very tight supply. And even if we have an aging population when it comes to farming, which is actually no different than the general population as well. So that's another topic of discussion. But I see a lot of discussion around the aging population for the farm, the average age of the farm population. But really, at the end of the day, I think it's an overall issue for the entire country and across all different sectors. And I do think that we are farming a little bit longer, which is as well makes sense given that the overall population tends to work a little bit less, maybe, but tends to work a little bit longer. Anyhow, absolutely. I think that might, at the end of the day, have an influence in terms of Ontario versus Saskatchewan, and maybe have long term. And it's probably not something that we're going to see the impact of in the next year or so. But the long term might have to think that supply might be a little bit more. Increase a little bit more in terms of available land for sale in Ontario relative to Saskatchewan, given that yields seem to be a little bit lower, given the elevated prices to begin with.
JP, we talked about land rent relative to the value, land rent relative to the revenue. Are there any other, for the keeners out there, are there any advanced statistics or metrics for people to maybe show some interest in?
Well, yes, and I think it requires a bit of a different tools, right? So if we're the report, you can only work the way that we're reporting things on a website, for example, or on any type of printed material, you can only report in 2 dimensions, right? So that's the reason why you're saying land rent as, relative to land values, or land rent. But of course, you bring this in a computer and then all of a sudden it opens up all different things that a lot of people on my team are quite interested in. And it opens up different dimensions in terms of the analysis, right? But I would say the 3 legs of the stool when it comes to the farmland market or farmland values, rental rates, and farm revenues. Those are the 3 things, right? And you can expand on farm revenues a little bit to consider not just the gross revenue part of the equation, but as well input costs, interest rates. But that's the 3 legs of the stool. And you can combine this, to get a sense of, hey, where should I take my business?
Okay, final question. Crystal ball, what happens going forward?
When it comes to land values, I think I've said this many times and I've been wrong. And so it's full disclosure. I do think that we have to have land values slow down. There's just no way that we can sustain profitability under the current dynamics in the marketplace. It's going to take a little bit of time. We've already have seen commodity prices weaken a little bit. So that's just absolutely normal to see prices retreat a little bit. Farm input costs are going to take a little bit more time, even if we've seen fertilizer prices come down and so forth. Overall input costs, production costs are going to take a little bit more time before coming down. So I do think that spells, with high interest rates and interest rates that are going to remain elevated for a little bit here, I think that spells a little bit of a slowdown in the rate of increase. I think the market itself, farmland market, rests on solid ground. So I'm not expecting any type of decline, but I do think that we have to have a little bit of a slowdown in land values to bring everything back together, so to speak, because we have a little bit more divergence right now between farm revenues, interest rates, and land values. I think we need to bring this back together, and the market's going to work towards that. But it's just the question is how long is it going to take before we get to that point? As I said, I've been saying this for a couple of years at least now, and it turns out that I've been wrong. So
I think lots of people have been wrong, JP. Don't be hard on yourself, my friend.
That's fine.
Hey, JP, great stuff. Really appreciate the discussion. This is important work that you're doing there at Farm Credit Canada. Thanks so much, and we'll chat with you again soon.
It's always a pleasure, Shaun. Thanks so much.
Would love your feedback on what you just heard there from JP Gervais of Farm Credit Canada, talking about land rents across the country. Are there things that are unanswered for you? Are there other angles to take on this? What are your thoughts? What do you think happens going forward with land rental rates? It's hard to figure out. Obviously, the land value and what happens next, as JP talked about, there feels like there needs to be some sort of a slowdown, a pause. I'm not sure retraction, but definitely things need to slow down from the land value. You think they would. Will they? Well, like JP said, he's been wrong before. Leave me your thoughts. shaney@realagriculture.com is my email, or call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Greg Northey of Pulse Canada. We're going to talk about the need for extended interswitching right after this.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
With the weather that's been transpiring in parts of eastern Canada this week, I'm sure that soybean planting has definitely slowed down, to say the least. But having said that, gives you a bit of time to reflect, stop, think. Think about Heads Up seed treatment. Protect your beans from rhizotonia, root rot, white mold, and SDS with Heads Up. Visit your nearest Agrimart location or visit headsupst.com to learn more. New campaign has been launched by a group of organizations, and they're talking about trying to find ways to, tweak and play with trying to improve rail service in Western Canada. Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture had a chance to catch up with Greg Northey of Pulse Canada to discuss the why of this. Here's their discussion.
The federal budget legislation introduced last month includes a commitment to a pilot project involving interswitching, extended interswitching between railways in Canada. And joining us to discuss this provision, this measure that's in the budget bill, we're pleased to welcome back to Real Agriculture, Greg Northey, Vice President of Corporate Affairs with Pulse Canada. Thanks for taking the time to join us again today, Greg.
No, thanks for having me.
So interswitching, this measure that's in the bill, I guess, first of all, what is interswitching? What is this term that we hear used regarding the railways? What does it mean?
Yeah, so interswitching is a practice that's been used in Canada since the early 1900s. Essentially what it does is it allows a shipper who is on one rail line to have their traffic moved to an interchange that's close to them. And where another railway can then take it for the rest of the journey. So it essentially gives that shipper a choice where they could either use their serving carrier, or they can move to an interchange, have it switched over, and move on to another carrier for the rest of the journey to the destination.
So how does this work today, and what would it look like if the budget legislation, the measures that are in it, and commitments that have been made there go ahead?
Yeah. So right now, interswitching can be as long as you're within 30 kilometers of an interchange where the two railways meet. Extended interswitching would extend that to 160 kilometers. So this is a tool that was introduced originally back shortly after the 2013-14 failure to move. The crop in that year was brought in for 3 years, and it gave shippers especially in the prairies, larger access to a competitive rail provider. So what this budget bill is doing is reintroducing that. That was removed in 2017. 2018. And so this budget bill is proposing to bring it back, although they're going to bring it back on a pilot basis and what they're describing as a temporary pilot basis. So that's where we're at now.
So what does that mean? Pilot, temporary? Do you have does that mean the details are still to be determined?
Yeah, well, this is the concerning part. I mean, the grain sector, when we did experience that extended interswitching a few years ago, it was very positive. It brought a lot of competition. It gave shippers who, for their entire history, would never have been able to access a competitive forces within the rail sector, access to another provider, which is really game changing. Competition, as we know, is just really important. Drives down costs, increases innovation. It does all kinds of really positive things for the economy and for the grain sector. And so it was really good. When it was removed, it was problematic. Bringing it back, conceptually is really excellent. And the budget bill flagged that it was for competition, which is really a really great platform. But, while we're glad to see it come back, the fact that it is essentially an 18-month pilot and what they're describing as temporary is problematic. The issues with an 18-month period are fairly concerning because it doesn't necessarily give some shippers could be under contract for the next 18 months. They may not be able to use it. Any shipper who may want to use it, if they know it's going to end, they may feel that it presents a risk because, you don't necessarily want to create a situation where your existing carrier feels like you're trying to leverage competition against them. And so, the 18 months we feel is going to be a bit of a potential roadblock to its effective usage, but we're going to be pushing for that to be lengthened out, but we're also going to be watching to see its usage over, if this does pass with the 18 months.
Yeah, I guess 18 months, if you're going to jeopardize a relationship with your only option in terms of a railway service provider, that point you're making about that makes a lot of sense in terms of grain shippers may not see it as worthwhile exercising that option. So, Greg, Pulse Canada and other grain shipper organizations representing producers and supply chains in agriculture have launched this campaign or are launching this campaign calling on the government to move ahead with this. What are some of the other, you mentioned the 5-year timeline, what are some of the other ideas that you're bringing forward in terms of the consultations that you expect to happen around this?
Yeah, so we are launching a campaign. It's called Flip the Switch. You can go to interswitching.ca to check it out. But so in addition to the 18 months, there's also the distance. So 160 kilometers was a distance that was used before. But one of the issues with that distance is that it excludes some key areas in the prairies from actually accessing competition. And so our view is simply that if you're going to run a pilot, out of fairness, you should have it extended to all shippers so that they can utilize it. So, to get into the region, say like the Peace River region or Carrot River, certain areas where 160 isn't far enough, we're proposing that the distance be expanded to ensure that shippers in those areas have access to a potential interchange, and that would be 500 kilometers is what our proposal is. The second piece is that the fact that we really rely on these interchanges where the two railways meet to be, to have the appropriate infrastructure. And so, not every interchange can handle a unit train. Some of them are very limited in what can be interchanged. And so our proposal, and in fact, it's in the bill here where, railways do have an obligation to make sure that the facilities at these interchanges are functional and work for the purpose of interswitching. And so our proposal as well is to make sure that we're investing in our infrastructure. If we're going to finally unleash competition in the rail sector, which I think everyone can agree with, there'll be a tremendous benefit to the Canadian economy as well as shippers. We may as well invest in the infrastructure to make it as effective as possible. And so that's our other focus with the campaign. So
the railways, though, are opposed and are actively fighting this. In fact, I've heard ads speaking out against this pilot project, saying it will reduce efficiency, that it will hurt supply chains. Not a good idea. What's your response to those concerns from the railways in terms of them seeing this as or portraying it as something that will actually hurt the efficiency of our supply chains?
Yeah, well, listen, like the railways have been interchanging for over 100 years, right? They are creative. They have a lot of ingenuity in how they did it. They've developed processes for over that period where they're, interchanging with other railways all the time. And we know that they can be efficient, right? We know that they have the ability to do it. And, I don't think there should be any fear. Like when you unlock competition, you unlock innovation, I think the railways are up to the challenge of being able to collaborate with each other. This is another key thing. The railways also talk about collaboration a lot. Well, this is a collaborative gesture. This is the opportunity for them to collaborate with their competitors, both in Canada and the U.S. They can find efficiencies where a certain railway they don't have enough capacity to move certain traffic. Instead of simply not serving their customer, it gives the opportunity for that customer to more efficiently find someone who has capacity. So our expectation is that once you start to unleash competitive forces, you're going to create this scenario where we're going to see efficiencies come into the system. And, for some shippers who are on a single rail line, they're forced to either go to Vancouver or, they don't have the option, say, to market their grain to places that could have potentially less congestion. So you could start marketing your grain in the U.S. You could start marketing to other ports, like Prince Rupert, for instance. And so you're going to start to see what we would expect to see is sort of optimal choices being made in the supply chain. So, we would suggest the railway should embrace the challenge, embrace the opportunity, because they'll also have access potentially to customers that, because they're a monopoly now, they wouldn't have access to before, because some of those shippers aren't on their own rail line. So, it's a bit disappointing to see the railways talk like that, because they should be embracing sort of the opportunity here for the Canadian economy and for collaboration, innovation. But I think they'll come around.
That is Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture talking to Greg Northey of Pulse Canada. Interesting stuff. 18 months versus 5 years. You could see how they're asking for an extended period there. The railways also have their opinion on this issue, and like Kelvin had mentioned, they are campaigning pretty hard against some of these things that groups like Pulse Canada are asking for. When we come back on Real Ag Radio, we got a little bit of time for the top ag news stories today. You're listening to Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
It's now time for the top ag news stories of the day, which is sponsored by Koch Agronomic Services, makers of Tribune nitrogen stabilizer. Protect your UAN from all three forms of nitrogen loss. Learn more about Tribune and other nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement solutions at kochagronomicservices.ca. That's Koch, K-O-C-H, agronomicservices.ca. Okay, we got a little bit of time. Just a little bit here. Let's get into it. First up, Canadian dollar has actually slipped down to 73.36 compared to the U.S. Kind of interesting here. This is something to really, really follow, especially as we see Canada pausing on interest rates versus what we're probably going to hear tomorrow is the U.S. increasing 25 basis points. Now, like I mentioned yesterday, the key is what we hear out of Chairman Powell in regards to what happens next. Do we see a pause, or do we see them continuing to be somewhat hawkish on interest rates? Also, Australia, their central bank shocked investors with a 25 basis point hike on Tuesday, so very early today, also warning that more rises may be needed. So sticky inflation was to blame. The market thought the Reserve Bank of Australia was done hiking after it paused at the April meeting. The Australian dollar and government bond yield surged while stocks fell. The Australian dollar is trading at 66.94 to the US and is performing relatively the same. I kind of compared US dollar or Canadian dollar to the US and Australian dollar to the US, and they're about the same over the last 52 weeks. U.S.-Canada trade officials to meet today. The U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai will meet with Canada's Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development, Mary Ng, today. Once again, I will make the note. I think the minister has way too many things to be worrying about. It should be the Minister of Trade, but that's a whole different discussion. What the two of them will be talking about at a meeting in Washington is a key topic will be the updates regarding Canada's implementation of the dairy tariff rate quotas, the TRQs, which the U.S. complains are being implemented in a way that limits access for U.S. dairy products to the Canadian market. There was a second dispute resolution panel that was filed basically the end of January. We're probably not going to see the results of that for about 7 months. So I don't think there'll be any sort of solution today, more of an update, if anything. In other news, CN has reached a deal with their union. So mechanics, intermodal, and clerical workers at the Canadian National Railway, who were on the brink of striking in March, have voted to ratify the agreements that kept them off the picket line. So that's good news. Reuters is reporting the senior Ukrainian official says talks on the Black Sea grain initiative are currently set for Wednesday, with all sides taking part. Well, that's a positive. Reuters continued by saying, the source told Reuters, hopefully there will be results. Russia has continued to complain that not all portions of the deal have been implemented relative to bolstering Russian grain and fertilizer exports, and they continue to call for the removal of what they say are restrictions imposed by the West on Russian agricultural exports. Have you been following the wheat market? We had, yikes, wheat just feels like it's in this vortex of redness every day. Wheat prices have been dropping due to ample global supplies and favorable weather for the U.S. crop, despite slow Black Sea exports from Ukraine amid operational problems tied to Russia's invasion. Now, I believe wheat was down again today, but this morning when I was kind of going through the markets, September Chicago wheat, it's dropped 89 cents in the last month, down to 626 3/4. September spring wheat has down 105 1/4 in the last month, down to 792 3/4. And I believe the market was down again today. So U.S. spring wheat planting is continuing to lag the average pace. And even compared to last year when overly wet conditions kept farmers out of the fields for an extended period, according to an article from Grain Fox. So, yeah, the wheat market really seems to be confused. There was a lot of focus a couple of weeks ago on that quality of that U.S. winter wheat crop. Does that provide a bit of a bullish sign for things like spring wheat? Has not happened. No. Has not happened. So it's definitely a lot of challenging times right now in the market, trying to steer through it, trying to figure it out, and trying to quite frankly make sense of it when it comes to your crop marketing decisions, for sure. Yeah, there is red on the screen today. The only thing that really up at the time of doing the show here, everything's red except for soybean oil. And canola was up. Yeah, barely, but it was up. If you have any feedback on today's show, we would love to hear from you. We discussed some really good stuff today. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media channels or call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thank you so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of RealAg Radio, brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.